But as I said earlier, the reason that enterprises are actually able to function and to scale is because they've implemented some bureaucratic principles.
Welcome to the Value Factory Podcast, brought to you by One Accord. We're all about helping businesses thrive and grow through leadership, strategy, and meaningful impact. Now, whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out, our goal is to provide insights and inspiration to help you navigate your journey. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the Value Factory Podcast presented by One Accord. I am your host, Andrew Ballard. We've got another great guest, a new author, and we're going to talk about his book. In fact, the title is Scaling Pyramids, Leadership Lessons from a Mid-Level Bureaucrat. That just cracks me up. You definitely got my attention. So I just want to share a little bit about our guest. Chris Stitt has more than 30 years experience in converged security and integrated risk. He spent a career as a special agent for the U.S. Diplomatic Security Service. I think, Chris, that's referenced also as DSS, and then transitioned into entrepreneurship and founded his current company, CrisisLead LLC. And it's about helping you navigate and prepare for what's next. He is also, as I said, an author. He's a speaker, a consultant, and a coach. And Chris, welcome to the Value Factory podcast. So great to have you here.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's fantastic to be here with you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to this community and the Value Factory here. And I've been thrilled to be part of a member of the One Accord community for about the last year, I'd say, and some really great connections and people in there, and very happy that I'm able to be part of that.
And so you and I see each other in that online community every Wednesday. And so
Yeah.
we've had a chance to chat. I've got a question for you, though, Chris. Bureaucrats are not exactly the most popular people. So I'm sensing you are not the typical bureaucrat. In fact, I know you're not. So why choose that label? Tell me a little bit about what went into titling your book.
So it's actually funny. When I was going through, this was about almost 15 years ago now, that I started to process the concepts of this book. And as I was sitting there one day going through some of the paperwork that I have to do as part of my job, following policies and procedures, things like that, it struck me that, you know what? I'm actually a bureaucrat. Working for the government, that might not be overly surprising. But as I started to play around with the thought in my head, and I started to reflect on other areas of my life, I realized that there's a lot of other areas in my life where actually I'm a bureaucrat there too. So for instance, I talk about it a little bit in the introduction to my book, but I was helping with the Scouting USA, at that time Boy Scouts of America, troop that was assigned to the country that I was working in. And part of the process as a scout growing up, you earn your merit badges, you achieve your ranks, you move up, the scouting pyramid. But at the same time, on the backside of that I didn't really have an appreciation for until I was an adult leader of the troop, was recording all that stuff, making sure that all of the scouts' achievements were properly documented, sent into headquarters in Texas, so that as the scouts moved, in our case, around the world, not just up through the ranks, that could follow them. And it was really that bureaucratic process that allowed that to happen effectively and efficiently. And we actually had a couple of scouts go all the way up through Eagle, and we were able to get the information from headquarters because people had followed the bureaucratic process to do all of that and make sure that they had everything they needed to achieve that rank.
Well, I absolutely love the analogy. I also skimmed your book before meeting with you today, and I'm not going to get it right, but there was something that really struck me, and I just thought it was very powerful. And that was that processes need to be managed and people need to be led, or people are about leadership, processes about management. And that distinction I had never heard before, and I really liked that. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, it's actually something that, I heard quite a bit in leadership development, when I would take classes or when I would do reading, or have conversation with other leaders. And, the key is that programs and processes, those are things that you manage. If you try to manage people, it really won't go as well. You need to lead people. You can sit there and say, I lead this program. What you're really saying there, though, is that you lead the people that are helping you enact that program, that are helping you make that program a success. But really, what you're doing is you're managing the program, but people really need leadership.
That, Chris, that's one of the best differentiations I've heard between management and leadership. And I know we both have carnage working for really poor managers. And I think that that's not unusual. I think that might even be typical. So, another conversation I'd like to engage you in is, where do mid level leaders have the most impact on the enterprise, and especially in terms of building value for the enterprise?
So, if you really think about it, and I have drawings of this in my book, the concept of the pyramid, and a lot of people think about the government, bureaucratic pyramid, where you've got the secretary of whatever organization. In the book, I use kind of the secretary of pyramids as an example. And underneath that, you've got deputy secretaries and assistant secretaries. And, then you've got all of your different levels of management, all the way down to eventually the people that are actually doing the work,
I was going to say the
right?
people on the
Frontline
street level
workers.
that are actually taskmasters.
Exactly. And, there's a lot of layers in between that. And what you also have to understand is that it's not a single pyramid. It's actually pyramid within pyramid reporting chains. So I
Explain
have
that.
people,
Explain
so I
that to
had
our
people that
audience.
Yeah, so I had people that worked for me, right? But I also worked for someone else. My particular sub pyramid was security, but we also had sub pyramids of human resources, operations, different verticals, very similar to the corporate sector. And I'll get to that in a second. But one of the things that happens is that each one of those sub pyramids forms its own reporting chains, forms its own little culture, its own organizational unit, but they're all feeding back up into the main pyramid.
And is the
And
main pyramid analogous to the enterprise? And then
yes,
the sub
yep,
pyramids are more departmental?
exactly.
Okay, I get it now.
Yep, they could be departmental, and the same thing happens, quite frankly, in the corporate sector, right? At the top of the pyramid, you have the CEO, and along with the CEO, then right there at that level, you've got the board, the C-suite, things like that, and then you've got your mid-level managers, and then you've got your kind of line managers, and then you've got the people that are actually doing the work.
Hmm.
It's the same kind of structure. And where mid-level managers become so useful and so powerful is that they actually, you've got the top level setting the goals, the vision, everything like that. But it's the mid-level managers that have got to take those goals and visions and somehow get the rest of the enterprise to enact that to be successful.
Right.
At the same time, the mid-level managers have a much better view as to what's going on deeper in the pyramid, even at the bottom of the pyramid, that the top level leadership might not actually be able to see, especially not on a day-to-day basis, because they're managing and leading the entire enterprise.
Got
So
it.
really, it's kind of where that picture, that pyramid comes into play, and how those mid-level managers really are in that sweet spot to, manage up and down and lead up and down.
And I know we're going to talk about pyramids in just a moment, but with regard to that impact mid level managers can have, how can CEOs unlock their power?
So one of the things that they can really do is they can really work to engage that mid-level. And like I said earlier, part of the problem is it's not just, the big pyramid, but it's those pyramid within pyramid reporting chains. Sometimes those get referred to as silos.
Hmm.
And what people need to understand is that the silos are not cylindrical shaped. The silos themselves are actually pyramid shaped. And one of the things to really unlock the power of the mid level leaders is to make sure that they are actually working across the boundaries of their own silos. So they understand what they're doing and how it affects other parts of the enterprise. And that can be either in formal structured activities such as meetings or training, or some of the artifacts of the company culture that you may have up there, that on the walls, where people get an idea of where they fit into the overall system and how they're helping to power the overall system.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of informal ways too that you can get people to interact with each other and really learn how what they're doing affects the rest of the enterprise as well.
That's fantastic. Great. It's good connective tissue. And this is going to sound like an oxymoron. We're talking about a bureaucratic process, and then we're talking about scaling. So, how can implementing bureaucratic processes actually help companies scale?
It's actually funny. As I was, listening to some of the other episodes of the Value Factory here, there was an episode a couple of weeks ago with Jesse Kroon and Nick Anderson.
Hmm.
And one of the things that they were talking about was the need to have SOPs, standard operating procedures, the need to have documented policies and procedures in order to ensure that everyone is aligned and moving in the same direction. And I sat there and laughed to myself and I said, they're talking about creating bureaucracy, because really that's exactly the power of bureaucracy. Right now, bureaucrats, especially right now, have a really bad name. But as I talk about in my book, and some of the history of the term and some of the history of the process of bureaucracy, it really is about creating, repeatable processes that you can grow at scale, that are standardized, so that people can come in and very quickly learn and understand them and help the enterprise continue to move forward. And it's also about, like I said, with Boy Scouts, effectiveness and efficiency. So when you talk about bureaucratic inefficiencies, yep, that's a place where the standard operating procedures have gotten so bogged down that just seems to an extent silly. I need you to fill this form out in triplicate, and I need you to have it notarized by two different people, witnessed by three others, right?
It
Sure, that's
gets a little, it
bureaucracy,
gets a little nuts.
and that's a little bit stereotypical of bureaucracy. In fact, I'm kind of amused. I kind of want to watch it. There's a show coming out this fall on one of the major networks called DMV, and it's kind of like The Office, but for the bureaucracy of the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Right. I've seen that promoted. It
Right.
looks fun.
And I'm sure that they are going to just, tear the concept of bureaucracy apart. But as I said earlier, the reason that enterprises are actually able to function and to scale is because they've implemented some bureaucratic principles. But the other part of this becomes, like I said earlier, need this in triplicate, notarized twice, multiple witnesses, etc. Part of the goal and role of a good bureaucrat is to find those areas in which, hey, you know what? This policy and procedure is no longer effective and efficient. We need to refine it or replace it. And with technology these days, that's something that is happening more and more rapidly. And it's really those companies that are able to meld their bureaucratic processes with the technology advances that are really going to be able to scale the fastest.
Well, and in my observations, those standard procedures, a standardized structure and way of doing things actually improves efficiency and reduces errors or defects, actually improves
Exactly.
quality
Absolutely.
because we're all doing the same things in the same fashion. It also enables us to communicate better with each other. So, security, continuity, and crisis readiness, they're all seen as a cost center. Oh, that's just going to cost us more money. But what are the 90-day plays that could turn them around and act into actually value creators? Producing an R.
Yeah, absolutely. And, let's go in the order that you mentioned them. Let's start with continuity. The backbone of a continuity program is your business process analysis. And this is also interesting when you consider what we were just talking about with bureaucracy and with making efficiencies. But a business process analysis, one of the things it does is it goes through and forces the company to identify what are all of their key activities. What are the things that we do that really matter, that really drive our success as a company?
And doesn't that analysis actually help you expose inefficiencies and where you need to lean up?
Exactly. So the next part of that becomes not only what are the key activities that we have to do, but what are all of the critical dependencies that need to come together in order to make those key activities successful, right? As you're going through this business process analysis, what you're able to find are where are those overlaps? Where are those inefficiencies? Where can we either eliminate some lines of effort that are not contributing the value that is necessary, as long as those lines of effort are not a critical dependency to another line of effort?
Right.
Or you can go through and say, hey, here are two almost identical processes, and we really don't need two of them. We just need the one. So let's create an efficiency here that allows us to get a return on investment of this continuity program
Hmm.
by creating more efficiencies and maintaining our ultimate effectiveness.
Well, I'm kind of a lean nerd, and um, I love that you keep using the word value, not just because our podcast is called The Value Factory, but in lean, value is determined by the customer, what they're willing to pay for. But there are also some activities or functions that are in support of value. And so they might not be considered value, like, the supply chain and things like that, but we need them to produce the product that the customer sees as value. So I really like the way you're talking about creating value in the enterprise. So if an owner wants more options and more options within just a couple years, I'm not talking about a 5 or 10 year time horizon, 1, 2, or 3 years, what should they ask their mid-level leaders to do to reduce owner dependency?
So again, that comes back to a little bit what I was talking about earlier. It's really about developing those mid-level managers into mid-level leaders. And a lot of that comes back to encouraging them to understand different parts of the company, to commingle, to network, to build relationships, not just within the company, but also with your suppliers, with your customers, with your external stakeholders, so that they really understand how the overall enterprise works.
Hmm.
And then one of the things that was done, for me by one of my bosses is, you know, he took me along, literally took me along. So one of the things we did as regional security officers at U.S. embassies is we co-chaired what's called the Overseas Security Advisory Council and the country chapters for that. And the oversee OSAC, Overseas Security Advisory Council, some people out there may be familiar with it, but it is really the public-private partnership between the US federal government and the US private sector that has operations abroad that is focused on the security side of things. So information sharing, preparedness, different things like that. And typically in a country, you'll have an OSAC meeting either once a quarter or once a month. It depends on the pace of that country and the activities that are going on in that country. If things are really bubbling, sometimes you might have meetings more often. But my boss literally took me along, and not just me, but the other folks in our office as well, on kind of a rotating basis, so that we could see and understand and interact with these external stakeholders.
That sounds like that was a good leader.
Yeah, thereby preparing us to, you know, um, take on that role ourselves.
Hmm.
Same thing in the corporate sector, right? What are you doing as a top level leader to make sure that you're developing those beneath you so that you have the faith and confidence that they can take over and step into your shoes, either on a short-term basis because of a leave situation or a personal issue situation, or even quite frankly on a long-term or permanent situation, as you talk about succession planning.
Hmm.
One of the things for us in diplomatic security and quite frankly, the rest of the State Department and the Foreign Service, we rotated every 1 to 3 years. So we were constantly
You
being put
rotated your
in,
projects or your functions?
we rotated the countries we were living in.
Okay.
We rotated the programs that we were managing. We rotated the people that we were leading every 1 to 3 years.
And didn't you work in a couple dozen different countries?
So, yes, I was actually assigned to 5 across Central America, Africa, and the Middle East. And throughout the course of my career, I actually worked in a total of about another 40 others.
Oh my
And some
gosh.
of those Yeah, some of those were short term, just 1 or 2 days visiting a place to do a review of something or to have some meetings. Some of them were more extended, a week, 2 weeks, a month, to help with a project or, do a longer review, something like that. So, yeah, about 45 countries total throughout the course of my career.
Wow, that's crazy. This is a little bit off script, but with those 45 countries, which one really stood out to you?
So, you know, there's a joke in the foreign service, don't get sent to Ouagadougou. Ouagadougou is the capital of Burkina Faso, and oddly enough, it is one of the places that I got sent. And it was the first time that I was actually the chief security officer for the US Embassy, which we call the regional security officer, our region being the consular district of, Burkina Faso.
Hmm.
But Africa is a really interesting place. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in West Africa. We used the opportunity, my wife and I, to really explore the region. We went to Timbuktu for a day, a place that actually does exist. Most people think it's just something from Dr. Seuss, but Timbuktu does exist. And I've been there. We went to Ghana. We went to northern Mali, Dogon country, but really having the opportunity to explore and spend a lot of time there with the people, with the cultures, because it's not just one culture. It really is a really interesting place.
Well, thanks for that color commentary. I was just personally curious because I know that you've been a real globetrotter as a special agent. I'd like to go back to our silo conversation. And can you share with us and our audience what routines bridge silos between various departments like sales, operations, products, product development, getting the products to market, and just, how you can bridge those silos. You used the word a few moments ago called interdependencies, and that is huge between those sub pyramids you were talking about. A lot of times there are interdependencies that are necessary.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, there's a couple of different ways that you can make sure that your people are, as I mentioned earlier, commingling and getting across and having some good interactions with folks from other silos. Honestly, one of the things that I tried to do at my overseas posts was I almost never had lunch in my office. That might seem silly, but one of the things about it is, there's a lot of people out there that want to eat at their desk because they want to show the boss that they're working hard and they're getting stuff done and they're so committed to the mission, right? To the activity that they're just going to eat at their desk while they're working and keep going. But what I found was not only did I almost never eat lunch in my office, I almost never ate lunch with the people from my office. And part of that was because we staggered our lunch schedules in order to maintain continuity in our office so that if somebody knocked on the door with a problem, there was somebody there.
Right.
But what I did was I actually went out of my way to sit down with who haven't I talked to in a while. There's a guy over there from operations. There's a guy over there, from in our case, the intelligence community, or from, one of the other law enforcement organizations, or from consular affairs, which is kind of equivalent to our, sales and, operations because the product they produce are US passports and visas, right?
Is that
Who have
tied to
I
the
not
embassies?
Right. So,
Okay.
when you're talking about, within the embassy. So, who within the enterprise or my little corner of it in the embassy have I not spent some time with recently? And the things that I would learn about what was coming up, what was going on. Hey, the economics section is going to have a big presentation and they're going to have 30 people in about 3 weeks that are going to need access to the embassy conference room. Okay, that's great to know. That's way better than finding out the night before when they put in the access control request saying, hey, we have these 30 people showing up tomorrow. If I know about this ahead of time, I can actually take steps and put pieces into place to better welcome your guests and to make the process of entry much smoother. So I can adjust my policies and procedures in order to empower what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
And building those relationships, really becomes important in trying to do that.
You're a pretty
So,
smart bureaucrat there, Chris. I like that. It's like,
well, I've had a lot of really smart people that I've tried my best to learn from.
oh, that's fantastic. So we just talked about embassies. So from embassies under threat, uh, to founder led companies, what's the most important crisis leadership behavior that you think transfers best?
Yeah, I would say, self-regulation and communications discipline. So I talk a little bit when I'm actually out there on the speaking circuit right now, and some of the articles that I've read, that I've written, talk about self-regulation. When you're in a crisis situation, people are going to be looking to the leader as the model of how they should be behaving and reacting to things. That's point number one. Point number two is there's a major difference between your normal operations, an emergency, and a crisis. And one of those major differences is the impact that emotion and adrenaline have as you get into that emergency and as it slides into a crisis.
And my
And the
guess is
ability,
as it escalates, so does your stress, other hormones, and just anxiety.
absolutely. And, so I gave a talk earlier this summer to a client, a keynote on crisis management. And one of the things, I had on the slide was a picture of, four different people reacting emotionally to a situation. And, the first person is just sitting there stunned. The second person is just kind of, trying to figure out what the heck is going on. The third person is just overwhelmed by all of the input that's coming in, and they're unable to function at all. And then the fourth person, which probably a lot of you out there know, is the screamer. He's the person that when the stress amps up, he's just going to turn around and be yelling at everybody, right? None of those four are particularly useful when you're trying to lead through a crisis. And if you as a leader don't have the ability to self-regulate, or I know Gav Schneider was on the program a couple of months ago as well, and he talks about adrenal response management. I actually went through both the graduate diploma in organizational resilience, risk, and high performance, and the graduate certificate in organizational resilience, risk, and high reliability. And in both of those, especially when we're talking about crisis management, we talk a lot about adrenal response management. And in some of the other talks that I've given and some of the articles I've written, I talk about the concept that you need to encourage some mindfulness into your practices so that you can actually help yourself calm down, regulate that emotional response, refocus, and model the behavior that the people you're leading need to see. The second point that I really want to harp on here is communications discipline. When you're in a crisis, be it government or in a crisis in the business world, what you do and what you say are just as important. And in fact, what you say may be even more important than what you do.
And probably how
And
you say it.
how you say it as well. Absolutely. The classic one is BP, the Gulf oil spill. And, a couple of, days, weeks into the recovery efforts, the CEO of BP was asked, so, what are you guys doing to care for the victims' families and to contain, the oil that was continuing to pump out into the ocean and cause a major disaster? And his response was, I just want to get through this so I can get my life back.
No,
Kind of a tone deaf response,
a
right?
selfish
And
one
there's
at that.
lots.
It's all about
Yeah,
me. It's all about me.
it's all about me. And, again, it doesn't show the focus that you need to have and the discipline and communications you need to have. And these days, with social media, with 24 hours news networks, with blogs and everything else like that, making sure that all of your people have communications discipline is critically important, because what you don't want is somebody out there on social media giving a counter narrative to what is actually the messaging that the company is trying to get out. And
And it
you
sounds
also
like
want to
that
make
CEO left a void of data, which is ripe for people to get in and maybe share some misinformation.
exactly. And the other problem becomes you don't want to lie to the public and your external stakeholders, because one thing that happens is they'll try to put a good shine on things. They'll try to put a good spin on things, but then it might start to bubble out from within the company that here's what's really going on.
Hmm.
And what that does is it damages your brand reputation. It damages your customer confidence. It damages, shareholdings, etc.
And those are all long-term conditions that they don't
It's
go
it's
away overnight.
incredibly difficult to rebuild that trust. And, I know you've had Dr. Rob McKenna on to talk about, the value of trust, that makes enterprises actually work. And that without trust, they will fail quickly.
You
So
know,
you want to make sure your communications discipline doesn't undermine your trust either.
so the communication was second. Remind us of the first again.
The first one was self-regulation.
Self-regulation. That was it. So one observation, and I'd love to talk about emotional intelligence, EQ.
Yes.
Those four people, the ones that you were using the example of, and, the screamer and all that. It sounds to me like they were all in a fight, flight, or freeze mentality. And so they're just no help to anybody. But, you talked about regulation, and from the EQ framework, you have to be self-aware before
Absolutely.
you can, manage yourself.
Absolutely. And that's, a big part of it. And in fact, it's funny that you mentioned, because I just had an article that published in Security Journal Americas, and I'm giving a talk about it at Global Security Exchange, in that there's a paradox around the world vulnerability when it comes specifically to security leadership. Very, within the security industry, vulnerability means this is something that is bad, that needs to get locked down, needs to get mitigated. It can cause us harm, right? In executive leadership, however, that self-awareness and that vulnerability is a key part of emotional intelligence and a key part of being able to interact with others and to lead others. So one of the arguments that I'm making in this article and in this talk is that, especially in the security realm, but I would argue it's not just, within the security realm, other verticals have this problem as well. You need to start by admitting that there is a paradox, and then you need to embrace it. And that if you're always training people that vulnerability is bad, then people will get that ingrained in themselves, that vulnerability is bad. But one of the things that does is that inhibits their ability to really lead. And probably most importantly, it inhibits their ability to lead outside of the security section itself,
Hmm.
because they don't have that self-awareness and that ability to really communicate and interact with other folks throughout the business enterprise, other leaders throughout the business enterprise. So emotional intelligence is really, really important. I did a quick survey of articles as I was writing my article, and I found that, out of more than 550 articles written on the topic of vulnerability in one of the major security trade magazines, only 6 of them listed vulnerability in the terms of emotional intelligence. I then went over to HBR, right? Harvard Business Review, and found hundreds of articles that were focused on the concept of vulnerability as a facet of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So
And
you've got this dichotomy.
Patrick Lencioni talks about, but you talked about trust. Trust is the bottom of the pyramid in his book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. But he
Yep,
also shared one of the best ways a leader can engender trust with their team is, in fact, being vulnerable.
absolutely.
So I think that's
Absolutely.
very powerful.
And that's what I'm saying. If security leaders are being taught vulnerability bad, then how are they going to actually engage that vulnerability within themselves to create that trust?
Well, as we close up, close out, I want to get in a plug for your book. Again, I love the title, Scaling Pyramids: Leadership Lessons from Mid-Level Bureaucrat. And
Thank
Chris,
you.
you talk like a leader, not like a bureaucrat. Anyway, so let's share with our audience when your book's going to release. I think it's any day now. And where can people find it?
Yep. So the publisher has moved up the release date to October 27th, and you can actually find it through all of your major retailers, only online. They're not printing copies to send to like your local Barnes and Nobles or Books A Million, but you can get it through Amazon, through barnesandnoble.com, and through the publisher itself, Routledge. And I know the publisher, Routledge, is actually running a promotion right now that you can actually get it for 20% off. So, and of course, it's available in paperback or ebook. There is a hardcover version, although those are really set up for institutions such as libraries and things like that. So the pricing point on that is a bit higher.
Academics.
Yep, for academics. think textbooks. And if you remember your college days and how much your textbooks cost you, but it is available out there as the paperback and as the ebook. And coming soon, we should also have the audio version.
Well, that is fantastic. So as a reminder to our audience, Chris's new book is called Scaling Pyramids, Leadership Lessons from a Mid-Level Bureaucrat. And as I said, you come way more off like a leader than a bureaucrat. But I love
Thank you.
how that experience, especially with the government, led to just, your key findings. And I'm excited for you and your book. And I thank you so much, Chris Stitt, for joining us on the Value Factory podcast. So
Thank you.
please continue to look for other episodes. And I doubt this will be the last time that we have a conversation with Chris.
Absolutely.
Chris, thank you again. And for everybody else, thank you for joining the Value Factory podcast presented by One Accord. I'm your host, Andrew Ballard, signing off. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew. So, Andrew, I was just going to throw in, if people wanted to connect with me on LinkedIn or find my website.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I can't get this thing to stop recording.
Well, do we want me to throw in that plug and then in post-production they can drop in the line?
Yes. In fact, why don't you do it now? In fact, I'll lead you into it. So again, we're so happy to have had you with us, Chris. How can people get in touch with you? I know you do a lot of consulting, speaking, and coaching.
Yeah. So first of all, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Christopher Stitt, CEM on LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. Also, I don't think there's any other Christopher Stitts out there.
And there's 2 T's at the end of Stitt, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Christopher, STITT, which actually stands for Certified Emergency Manager. And then also please check out my website, www.CrisisLead, all one word, .com. So CrisisLead.com, and you can find out more there on how to get in touch with me or through LinkedIn. I'd love to have further conversations with those that are out there in the audience.
Well, that's a great offer. And I know that you're the founder of CrisisLead. So again, thank you for joining us. And this is Andrew Ballard, your host, signing off for the Value Factory, presented by One Accord. Thanks, everybody.